I very well may be the only person on YouTube who came out and told you exactly how this was going to end. I told you that Palworld would not stay relevant long term, that it was only being hyped up to downplay Pokemon, that it didn't have an iota of relevancy to it. The only reason this game has been talked about at all over the past couple of years is entirely because of this lawsuit, because of the very obvious blatant plagiarism of Pokemon. And that's very apparent simply by looking at the designs. And that's not even going into the mechanics and how the game actually works. Like, this is a Pokemon ripoff. And Nintendo is now in the process of beating these people in court, getting their payout and hopefully getting their injunction against them. Now, we won't know the results of this lawsuit until November, but I have noticed that a lot of Palworld YouTubers are in full damage control mode. For example, one of the copes that has come out recently is this idea that Nintendo focusing on the older version of Palworld, the one that existed before they patched it to remove the similarities to Pokemon, that somehow annuls the lawsuit and that somehow means Palworld is going to get off scot-free. Doesn't work like that. Like, they stole mechanics from Pokemon. They stole the brand. They tried very, very hard to grift off the product. And Nintendo is demonstrating that in court that Palworld existing damaged their brand. And this is something I've been saying for a long time about how Palworld didn't really have a leg to stand on, how all of its hype was basically astroturfed, how it all felt fake as all out. How all these YouTubers who know nothing about Pokemon or about gaming in general, like, religiously tried advocating for Palworld, trying to say it was this huge cultural thing, that it was going to, like, destroy Pokemon in relevancy. And we've slowly seen over the past couple of years, like, the end result of that. We have seen this game get increasingly lower attention on social media. We have seen nobody be engaged with their trailers or with their social media posts unless they're outright talking about Pokemon or the lawsuit. Nobody cares at all. And we're seeing the ramifications of that, in that Palworld is not so much a game as it is something that people can use to weaponize against Nintendo. Nobody cares about Palworld at all, outside of this idea that it could be bigger than Pokemon and that it could beat Nintendo. And as we've seen over the past several years, that simply isn't going to happen. Early on, we were told that Nintendo would never file a lawsuit, that they could never win a lawsuit, and that Pocket Pair was doing everything above board and everything was perfectly legal. But as we can now see, the lawsuit was filed. They have been discussing this, and we are going to see a conclusion to this case in November. So we're going to see, like, in the next couple of months, we're actually going to see some behind the scenes things in regards to, like, what's actually been going on in the courtroom. And I think it's very apparent, considering, like, some of the decisions Palworld has made and, like, some of the things they've done, is just how increasingly desperate they are. From what I understand, Palworld's legal strategy was to try and garner as much support out of their core audience in the West as possible. They tried riling up controversy. They tried getting patents thrown out. They tried people getting invested. They tried emotionally manipulating people into thinking the small independent company was getting bullied by Nintendo because, they were scared of our product. Their goal was to try and win a PR war instead of a legal one, and that seems to have backfired on them massively, because it seems as if they were completely unprepared for the legal reality of what they did. They did not respond to Nintendo's legal prosecution as they should have. They released way too many public statements. They tried dismissing the idea. They still try leaning into, like, what the lawsuit was about initially, and they're using the controversy to kind of promote their brand. It's very clear to anybody who is not biased regarding the situation that Palworld is just some cheapskate knockoff company that has no ability to produce their own products. And that's going to be very apparent once they get to court and Nintendo starts breaking down everything that this company did to damage their brand, like how they crossed the line, how they disrespected them, and how they did everything they possibly could to make themselves look like the good guy in this situation. And one of the things Palworld tried to do to make themselves out to be this growing company was to try and pretend as if they were expanding the Palworld brand. They announced the Palworld TCG, and then they announced Pal Farm, the Pokepia knockoff. The idea of these projects was to try and expand the Palworld brand, to try and get people invested in the company, to try to get them engaged with similar Pokemon products. And there was an initial wave of hype and enthusiasm. When Pal Farm was first announced, everybody just agreed that it would be way better than Pokepia just because it was Palworld. But over time, it became apparent that these products weren't going to amount to much. Palworld TCG is never, ever, ever going to compete with the Pokemon TCG for a whole host of reasons. And now it's starting to look like Pal Farm is never actually going to come out. We haven't heard a thing about it since it was unveiled. And now, out of nowhere, just a couple of months before the final court ruling, Palworld has confirmed that Palworld 1.0 is releasing in July. So what Pocket Pair tried to do was to make as many cheap cash grabs as possible, release them around the period of July, before the court date ruling, just before, make as much money as possible in hopes that they could put together something that could pay off their legal fees and deal with the massive L against Nintendo. They are doing everything they possibly can before the court ruling completely makes their company inoperable. They milked this cow for all it was worth. And now, if they survive this, they're simply going to move on to the next thing and the next grift. And I feel as if they're never, ever, ever going to recapture this, because so much of this saga hinged on this idea that Pokemon was a company that the industry was desperate to take out. If you look back at the numbers, if you look back at the hype cycle, the only reason we ever were told that this was a game that outperformed Pokemon was because Jeff Keighley said it. And if you know anything about Jeff Keighley, he's unreliable and that he makes stuff up and that he was desperately trying to glaze this game, which, by the way, has made regular appearances at the Game Awards and has been something that Jeff Keighley has been desperately trying to make a thing for years. In other words, Palworld was never at any point more popular than Pokemon. And you can clearly see this by looking at their social media and seeing how many followers their accounts have. And when you really dig deep, you start realizing that the vast majority of the people posting about Palworld online, talking about it, are just bots. They are literally just paid bots, paid to promote Palworld. And that has led to this illusion that this was a moderately popular game that was going to do huge numbers when it actually got its full release on PC. But the issue, and I think this is very apparent, is that even the people who were shilling hard for Palworld had their fill of it a couple of years ago. Okay. Most people played the early access phase of the game and dropped it pretty quickly after that. Palworld is something that had no real staying power. And that's very evident by looking at these numbers. When you are announcing the release of your game and you're getting less than 1 million views on that trailer for this major announcement, you have a problem. And this isn't an isolated incident. This happens every single time Palworld makes any kind of announcement. The only time you hear about Palworld at all in the community is in regards to the Pokemon thing. Outside of that context, nobody is invested in the brand. Nobody is invested in the characters. Nobody even knows their names or anything about it. Palworld was the most recent example of an AstroTurf game that was sent to die against Pokemon, like the Pokemon killer. Okay. Just like Digimon and Yokai Watch before it. This was supposed to be the thing that like got people to move on from Pokemon. And once again, it completely and utterly failed. Currently, you're seeing a lot of Cope articles online, saying that Nintendo's going to win the lawsuit, but they're only going to get $30,000 or like that doesn't matter. Okay. The simple fact of the matter is, Palworld had every opportunity to course correct, to make a game that people actually wanted to play. They had every opportunity to not associate themselves with the Pokemon brand. They had every opportunity to like address the concerns that the community had about their product and about what they were offering people and about like the legality of it all. But they just kind of like tried to pretend that what they were doing was perfectly normal and that nothing bad was going to happen to them, legally speaking. Like instead of making a product that people actually wanted, they focused all of their efforts on like making it as deliberately controversial as possible to try and get attention and to try and get people invested in their brand and their company. And the end result of that is that the entire thing has just completely collapsed. Honestly, I don't even think Nintendo needs to win the lawsuit. That's actually been one of my main points going into this, is that it is completely unnecessary for Nintendo to win the lawsuit or even have like, I don't know, some kind of like massive win against Palworld. Like that's not really necessary. The important thing was addressing the fact that this game is nothing but a ripoff, going through the court system, addressing this stuff, furthering their methods of protecting their brand from companies like this and preventing things from like this from happening in the future. Because at the end of the day, in spite of all the hype and all the worship that Palworld got in the community, it did not leave much of an impression on actual players. If your entire brand is built on this idea that it's a better version of another brand, or that it's like some darker, more mature take, or your entire community is like revolves around hating its primary competition or the game that it ripped off, like you're essentially doomed to failure, essentially. Like Palworld made this critical mistake where it was too hyper fixated on making itself into a meme and trying to push itself as like the darker, edgier, more innovative Pokemon, and it just completely blew up on its face. And if anything, I think this proves that the ideas that people have for Pokemon, the idea that it should be mature, that it should tackle adult subjects, that like you should be allowed to like, I don't know, like eat and like have sex with your Pokemon, like I think Palworld demonstrates like how bad of an idea that actually is. Like Pokemon is as popular as it is because it's made an organic, original world that offers thousands of hours of enjoyment for its players, essentially. There's a reason Pokemon is designed the way it is and why it's structured the way it is. And like, there's a reason the tone is the way it is. Like something being more adult doesn't necessarily make it better. And I think Palworld demonstrates that concept very, very well.